Hey everyone, it's George from Blockchain DXB, now Bitcoin DXB. And today we have Ralph, who's the managing partner for Onramp MENA. So thank you so very much, Ralph, for doing this. Really, really appreciate it. Now before we start, just wanted to check, how's your day been so far?
Oh man, it's a busy day. It's been back to back. Thank you so much for having me today, George. I've really enjoyed our conversations and I appreciate what you're doing. How was your day?
Been a bit stressful considering the weather's getting ridiculously hot, isn't it? But the good thing is that the prices have been pumping up, so...
Yeah, tell me about it. The weather is not making my life easier. I mean, especially it's not making my wife's life easier because she's like 8 months pregnant, and the heat outside is just unbearable for her and for me. But yeah, man, I'm excited for this session.
Absolutely, and for our listeners, today we're going to be tackling Bitcoin Reserve or Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, how people like to call it. So what we thought about discussing in today's episode is taking a deep dive into the history of Bitcoin Reserve. We'll go and look at, what the businesses are doing, because right now there's this narrative regarding Bitcoin treasury firms. So we're going to be highlighting what businesses are doing, and we're going to be talking about the Trump effect as well. Now, whether you like Trump or not, his impact in the Bitcoin world is definitely phenomenal, and lately there's news regarding his organization buying Bitcoin as well. And we'll also go ahead and discuss what are the feedback that we'd like to give to governments and institutions regarding Bitcoin Reserve. Ralph, you were saying something.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you are a Bitcoiner, you cannot deny that Trump has been good overall for Bitcoin, and I think he's pulling a bit more from the Democratic side, the Bitcoiners at least. And yeah, man, this trend of Bitcoin treasuries, we'll dive into that. I have a lot to say about that because, it's something to be cautious about.
Yes.
And, really people like to jump on the bandwagon, and caution is highly recommended. So we'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, you can kick it off, George.
Yeah, and you talked about caution. I remember when President Trump did actually make the announcement regarding the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. One of the clients said that he confirmed that Trump is going to be buying $11 million worth of Bitcoin. And I was like, where did you get this fake news from? Because it was upfront fake news. So what you're saying is absolutely right. Now, before we start, I wanted to ask a very personal question, Ralph, and this is regarding Bitcoin. And what I tend to do is, whoever I interview, I ask them this question: how would you define Bitcoin? And what is your definition for Bitcoin?
Oof, that's a tough one because there's so many definitions for Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin can be defined in a box that is general for everyone. I think Bitcoin can serve multiple purposes. So it can be an investment tool where you want exposure to this commodity asset that has a capped supply and, you want to ride the wave. It can be viewed as a hedge against the system itself, similar to how a few decades back, people would store gold bars or gold coins in case, of time of crisis, in case the system collapsed. But it could also be defined as a payment network. In some countries, the banking system is quite oppressive and not inclusive. It's difficult to move money in and out, and Bitcoin can solve for that. So in other countries, Bitcoin is really, the only asset that can help you maintain your purchasing power over time outside of real estate, because that has issues. If you're in a corrupt country, an oppressive country, your property rights aren't there. So owning property doesn't really solve for that. And Bitcoin can be this tool that it sits outside of the system that allows you to, sleep well at night, knowing if you need to pack your stuff and just leave, you can take a big portion of your bags with you, your wealth with you. I like to define it as a getaway bag that's very huge because you can carry so much Bitcoin with just 12 or 24 words. But yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is different for everyone.
True, that is a brilliant definition, and I'm really liking that, you've covered all the aspects of it. So, thank you so very much for that, Ralph. Now, let's talk about the history of Bitcoin. One question that I wanted to ask is right now, a lot of presidential candidates, including President Donald Trump, they're talking about Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. But let's take a trip back in time. What about Satoshi Nakamoto? If he were to be listening to this news right now regarding Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, what are your thoughts, Ralph? Would he be happy about it or would he be upset about it?
I think, at one point in time, the whole WikiLeaks trend, Satoshi cautioned against Bitcoin getting too big too fast. And so I think he would appreciate that after 15, 16 years, we are now at the stage where we are talking about institutional corporate adoption, and the next step would be sovereign state adoption. I think the way Bitcoin grew is grassroots. So typically what we're used to is, the big players, the smart money, they adopt something and then it flows downwards.
Yeah.
But with a network or a protocol like Bitcoin, it took a very different approach. It started from the bottom up with a select few tech individuals, people who were more into the engineering and the software. And then over time, it made its way to millions of people across the world, because people, they don't need to understand the tech. They just need to understand what it can do for them.
Yeah.
And as such, that's reached now sovereign state level, where they are starting to understand that it can secure their ability to transact. For example, Iran, Russia, they can settle trade in a different way outside of the system itself. So again, a hedge. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's followed the journey it was supposed to follow.
It's taken a completely full circle, isn't it? And now presidential candidates are also talking about it. Now, one thing which I often talk about is, one of the OGs of the Bitcoin space called Simon Dixon. Well, I think it's the OGs of OGs. I mean, he used to talk about Bitcoin even before Bitcoin was created. He was a massive proponent of, states having Bitcoin onto the balance sheet. And I think, Ralph, back in 2013, he talked to Boris Johnson, who was the mayor of London back then. And he was actually advocating, about having Bitcoin as he didn't use the word strategic reserve as such. The terminology he used to use is, put it on the balance sheet. Now, a little bit later on, he did turn out to become the Prime Minister of England for a relatively short stint. So I think, Simon Dixon is probably one of the OGs in the space who used to talk about, Bitcoin onto the balance sheet. And I'm not sure if you've heard this podcast called as Bitcoin Hard Talk. Just a few days ago, he released an episode where he's talking about how banks, they want your Bitcoin, and lately a lot of banks are offering Bitcoin to the clients, even in Dubai, UAE as well, isn't it?
Yes. And I mean, there's a lot of visionaries, because if you really understand the economic ramifications and you wrap your head around, the technology plus, how the protocol works with the cap supply and the difficulty adjustment, you instantly go to gold. So you think gold 2.0, gold in the digital age. And so a lot of people, even Hal Finney, one of the OGs and one of the most important figures in Bitcoin, he made wild predictions in 2009, 2010, Bitcoin at $10 million per coin. And, 3 years ago, people would call you crazy if you do numbers like that. But nowadays, headlines, very influential CFOs, CEOs, governments are talking about this. And when you have an asset that has a capped supply, it begins to make sense. Now, if sovereigns adopt it, and we're kind of working our way to that slowly but surely, with states passing bills in the West, and Mubadala in Abu Dhabi closing that they own almost $500 million worth of Bitcoin through the ETFs. Conversation is changing, and I think one thing that's very unique about this whole, we like to call it sovereign game theory, because Bitcoin is a lot of game theory, right? True. So the miners, the node runners, the investors, all of them have an incentive to maintain the 21 million. So it can't change. Why? Because socially, why would you do something that would hurt the wealth you've parked in this asset? Everyone has an incentive to fight for that 21 million cap.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is that it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people understand that, the more people will fight for this. And we've reached a stage where it's become instrumental to have these conversations, because FOMO is a real thing, even at the highest echelon of politics. In the past, there was too much career risk to talk about it. Now, the tables have turned. There's too much career risk not to talk about it. So that's why you're seeing this wave of corporate CFOs in the West, in the US specifically, considering Bitcoin, even if they don't do it, it's just they have to look at it just from a risk management point of view, because the risk is if we don't study this, we might miss out, and they might make a decision that it's not worth the risk, but at least it's on their risk radar. So every year they will review the landscape and look at Bitcoin and then make a decision. Should we get it now, or are we still on the sideline? So I think it's just amazing how far we've come.
And right now we are in the so-called digital gold rush or Bitcoin rush, isn't it? As in when the halving kicks in. And one of my good friend Marcus Shantita, he mentioned via LinkedIn, he put a comment stating that was it the WikiLeaks adopting Bitcoin, or was it Gavin giving Bitcoin presentation to CIA that led Satoshi a step back? Definitely interesting point. And Marcus is also one of the OGs in the Bitcoin space. And he said, Simon Dixon is the man. You're absolutely right, Marcus. Thank you for tuning in. And everything that he said, Ralph, definitely makes a lot of sense, because right now there's a lot of FOMO. I remember, when I used to tell my family back home about Bitcoin, they used to completely dismiss it. What is he talking about? Now my niece, she is very much advocating regarding Bitcoin. So things have definitely changed. And one thing, going back to history, I can think of Argentina. I think it was Carlos, who's an Argentina lawyer, financial analyst. Back in 2014, he was talking about having Bitcoin onto the balance sheet. Now, back then he was saying 1% of allocation, which is roughly around 452,000 Bitcoin. Unfortunately, they did not do it back then. But let's say had they done it back then, they would have spent $347 million. And that amount now, Ralph, would have been roughly around $41 to $45 billion, depending on the price fluctuation. So if you're looking at the amount of profit, in just a matter of 11 years for doing absolutely nothing, isn't it? Just hodl.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So the idea that he proposed, 1%.
Yeah.
Not, let's go all in, this is going to blow up.
Exactly,
no. Because he's a financial analyst, he's someone who's very sophisticated, and he viewed it as a 1%. What is 1%, really? It's the FX rate you pay to convert from one currency to the other, and the central bank does that on a daily basis, right?
Yeah.
So 1%, 14 or 12, whatever it was, I think 2014, like you said, and that would have solved so many of the problems that Argentina is currently facing, because it's one of those hyperinflating economies, even though they have a lot of natural resources. The corruption plays a big part, but sadly, I don't think that's the only country we'll see. 10 years from now, there's going to be more countries. For example, the most recent one I think of is Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, Germany had 50,000 Bitcoin.
54,000 Bitcoin, and they started dumping them.
They're already regretting it.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't even have to wait 10 years anymore. I mean,
it was happening during the same time, summer season, right? Somewhere around July last year or something.
Exactly. So I think a lot of countries, at least if they have seized Bitcoin, or they'll try to at least protect that just in case, because they didn't have to use taxpayer money to purchase the Bitcoin. It was just seized from illicit activity. And over time, in a way, that's a good thing, because they have a stack, and now they have proof as the value increases that, okay, it might be worth considering a Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Carlos, legendary. Probably a lot of Argentinians I wish we listened to that guy.
Yeah, I mean, right now, even the current president, that is Javier Milei, he's a massive fan of Bitcoin as well. If I'm not mistaken, he did visit President Nayib Bukele in El Salvador as well to discuss about Bitcoin. Now, so far as I understand, I think he has been successful in closing the Central Bank of Argentina. I'm not sure if that information is right, but in US, President Trump, he just got an okay from Supreme Court, and potentially he might fire Jerome Powell. So let's see, if that news does actually materialize or not, and we'll very briefly go and touch base on that as well. But what about Iran? You did mention, Ralph, at the beginning as well regarding Iran. They've been a massive advocate of Bitcoin as well as Bitcoin mining in particular as well, isn't it?
Yeah, now Iran is a special case because Iran over the last decade, if not more, have been kind of unplugged from the US dollar denominated SWIFT system. So for them, it is a matter of survival. So it's not like in Iran you can mine Bitcoin at home, it's been somewhat nationalized, where miners have to, I think, deposit into the treasury directly. Bitcoin can't be moved outside of the country. It's being used to settle trades. So that's another definition of Bitcoin. Some people might have their views on Iran or not, but at the end of the day, we're not here to talk politics in that way. But it's clear that they have a solid mining infrastructure put in place.
And so far as I understand, the Central Bank of Iran, they are the only central banks that are pro-Bitcoin, isn't it? They've been massive advocates of Bitcoin. Maybe it is one way to go ahead and avoid sanctions, but at least that's the only central bank I can think of who are advocates of having Bitcoin. I'm not sure if they have it as a reserve or anything as of yet.
I don't think it's an official reserve of the sorts. It's being used more as a technology tool to survive, basically, to import, to settle trades. And they could do it with gold if they wanted to, but, gold is, there's too much friction in the movement of gold. And countries under sanctions would probably like to use something a bit more permissionless and less cost intensive. Doesn't mean it's a good thing, but at the end of the day, not everyone in Iran is a bad person.
True.
And they're trying to do their best to survive at the end of the day.
And just on a side note, I think Iran, they've already launched a central bank digital currency, which is live in an island called Skish Island. I'm not sure if you've heard of that place, Ralph. A lot of these laborers from Dubai.
I haven't, but I just...
They go to that island and they can actually use the central bank digital currency at a store. It is a proper CBDC that they have launched and it's live.
I mean, there's quite a few, right? China is kind of the leader in that space. The European Union is really pushing for CBDCs. They've decided, so it's either you look at Bitcoin and you decide to go the Bitcoin path, or you are, no, we're going to do the opposite. We will have programmable money that we can control. And countries such as China have really pushed it forward. And there's a proof of concept there that's actually backed by real life situations. And I mean, at the end of the day, really, my issues with CBDCs is all fiat right now is some form of CBDC. Who walks around with cash? It's almost all digital. But the difference is you're taking out the banks and you're directly connecting it to the central bank.
Which is even worse to a large extent, isn't it?
Yes, because a lot of people can be targeted relatively easily. And at the same time, I mean, is that good for the banking system?
Especially with so much of political chaos and, people, government censoring, I think it's definitely dangerous for central bank digital currencies. I totally agree with that. But what about El Salvador? I mean, you could make an argument that they are following the whole strategic Bitcoin reserve because President Nayib Bukele occasionally posts on X that he's bought, let's say, 1 Bitcoin or maybe 2 Bitcoin, or at least it is consistent, isn't it?
Yeah, so El Salvador is an amazing case study. So it was a country that was, El Salvador was totally dollarized. So they are at the mercy of the Federal Reserve decisions at all times. And to some extent, the entire world is at the mercy, because if they change interest rates in the United States, that will flow to every asset class in the world, because every other central bank will need to adjust accordingly, right, because of interest rate differentials. But El Salvador is quite unique, and because it's a small country and they had limited options, and Nayib Bukele is on the younger side, he understood the technology, understood the asset, they took a leap of faith, and it's paid off tremendously. Even though, they were criticized, most of the rating companies were against them, the IMF, you name it. He did what he believed was going to be good for his country, and he is currently reaping the reward. It's not, I don't know if it's officially labeled as a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I'm not sure that's the official labeling, but it is close to one as you can imagine. And they've taken on so there's two ways. Either you do it stealth because you don't want to be front run, or you take the approach, and in his case, it was full transparency, where they post every purchase, they showcase the wallet, the address, all of that, and it's paid off. Tourism in El Salvador has increased by almost 30%. It's become a haven for Bitcoiners. Everyone wants to go to El Salvador as a Bitcoiner. And yes, the launch was not perfect. They had issues with some of the Bitcoin infrastructure, but when do you launch something brand new and it's 100% pristine right off the bat? Since then, there's been lots of improvements, but yeah, it's a fascinating case study.
Yeah, I just remember, they had a 90-day buffer when Bitcoin did become a legal tender, and on the 90th day when it became a legal tender, the prices of Bitcoin did actually fall down by $8,000. In that time, Bitcoin wasn't around 40 or 50,000, it was hovering around. So people were wondering, is it a terrible decision? But a lot of notorious traders back then, they were trying to manipulate the market. The prices definitely pumped up. And if I'm not mistaken, it is no longer a legal tender since January of this year because of the IMF pressure, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, I think because they were kind of in bed with the IMF as a struggling country, they get a lot of pressure. But I don't know if they're not buying anymore and they're just not telling the public. But I think after that headline, Nayib Bukele came out and kind of trolled the IMF and basically posted about them continually buying.
Yeah, so, ignored it altogether, isn't it? Rightly so as well, I think.
Yeah, and we were talking about the other approach, which is stealth, right?
Yeah.
So a tiny country, Bhutan, we found out that they've been mining using hydropower and building a strategic reserve of sorts, and they were way ahead of their game, right? And it's done them wonders as well. They didn't have to pay for it. They used sustainable energy and wasted energy to mine the Bitcoin. So it's fascinating. It's improved their infrastructure, and a lot of people say Bitcoin is bad for the environment, but it depends what the power source is. Yeah. If anything, I think the latest report shows that Bitcoin mining is the most sustainably green industry in the world. It's above 54% or something around those numbers.
Yeah, and what the listeners can do is, roughly around 2 years ago, Elon Musk, Michael Saylor, Jack Dorsey, they had an event called as the B event. Now, the B event was catered only to corporate institutions, and they were talking about ESG, how Bitcoin mining is actually much better. So if any other guys who are wondering about that Bitcoin takes a lot of energy consumption, please feel free to go ahead and read through that report, where they actually made a very solid argument that, Bitcoin uses much better form of energy. So, excellent points regarding that. And regarding IMF, the only thing I wanted to touch base, and this is because of the recent India-Pakistan chaos going on, Pakistan has also received a $1 billion loan from IMF. And right now there is news about CZ being part of Crypto Council innovation kind of a thing in Pakistan. So I'm not sure what the future plans are regarding a strategic reserve or having Bitcoin as a reserve, but I think it'll be a brilliant idea, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Pakistan did a 180 degrees on digital assets in general. Like, they're totally against it. I think there were rumors of it being totally banned. And, all you need to do as a politician is look outwards and see what's happening. And one of the things you don't want to happen to you as a leader is to feel like you've been left behind.
Yeah.
So that's the game theory in action, right? It kind of forces everyone to look at it and then make a decision. And a lot of times, it's not very complex. It could be just a 1% allocation. You don't have to, no one is, telling you that you have to allocate 15, 20%.
Yeah.
I mean, as Carlos said, 1% in 10, 15 years could be worth it, right?
That is the Mexican billionaire, isn't it?
No, that's the guy from Argentina, Carlos.
Okay, there's another, I think that is another Mexican billionaire called Coles. I forgot his name. I think he has kept 10% of his wealth into Bitcoin. So he's a Mexican billionaire and he wants, I think as much as possible, he wants to go ahead and buy Bitcoin. And he's been advocating for Bitcoin going back to at least 5 years, 2020 and 2022. So, I'm trying to recollect his name. Ricardo Salinas.
Yes.
Yeah, Ricardo Salinas. Yeah, he has been a massive advocate of Bitcoin as well.
And I think his actual position is around 80%, 70 to 80% in Bitcoin. I think, it's been upped a little bit. And on the Mexican side, we're seeing also a shift within the political landscape regarding Bitcoin. I think one of the future candidates, I forgot her name, but she's been a huge proponent. She had passed the bill, it got rejected, and she's submitting again. So even on that front, we're seeing, the Americas leading in some form of way on the political landscape when it comes to Bitcoin strategic reserves.
And we talked about America. What better person to talk about than President Donald Trump, the 45th and 47th? And they often call it as the Trump effect, isn't it? And to be honest, Ralph, that was the first time I ever heard this terminology called a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Because before that, we used to only talk about the terminology I used to hear is buy Bitcoin and put it onto the balance sheet. Occasionally, I used to hear Bitcoin reserve. But when Trump was at the Bitcoin Nashville event, he actually used the terminology called a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So what is your thoughts and what advice would you like to give to clients regarding, Bitcoin National event and the Bitcoin strategic reserve?
Well, so I would view Bitcoin. So the United States has an oil strategic reserve that they use when prices of oil go out of control. And also, they kind of are mandated to have that reserve for national security in the event of war or some emergency crisis, right? So I would think of Bitcoin similarly. The Bitcoin strategic reserve, yes, you're not going to put it in your engines and turn the lights on with it. But what it will do is it will guarantee your ability to transact and settle trades in a time of crisis. Because, we've seen it with Russia, with Iran. They were sanctioned and then their economies took a major hit because they couldn't settle trade. In the past, that used to be gold.
Yeah.
But in the digital realm, you want to settle much faster and without the friction of moving tons of gold from one location to another. It takes forever, costs a fortune to do that. With Bitcoin, it takes 10 minutes, up to 60 minutes of confirmation, so 6 blocks, and you can confirm finality.
Yeah.
So you can do it within a few hours, basically, settle a huge amount of trades at a very low cost in comparison to how you would do it normally, especially if you've been unplugged from the banking system. So it's a matter also of national security, and that's how I view it. And I view it, the same way at the individual level.
Yeah.
So especially, this might resonate more with people who are exposed or who have lived in hyperinflating economies where there are unofficial capital controls or where their savings were wiped and they want to move money out of the country. It becomes impossible. And moving gold out of a country that has capital controls is harder. You're not going to get past the airport guard, right? They're going to confiscate that gold. So Bitcoin gives you that sense of security that if you need to, you can move a portion of your wealth anywhere you want and have that with you as you leave a difficult situation. So that I would compare them exactly the same. One is at the sovereign level, one is at the individual level. They have this.
I think that is absolutely beautifully said. And for listeners, if you do want to find out information regarding strategic Bitcoin reserve, the best thing is to go to the White House website. It'll be in the show notes below. And you'd be surprised. There's a lot of misleading, fake news and incorrect information. Because as I mentioned earlier, Ralph, the moment President Donald Trump was at the Bitcoin Nashville event, I was seeing LinkedIn post that Trump has confirmed to buy $11 million worth of Bitcoin. And I was like, where did you see it in the speech? They were quoting another article. The article was quoted by another article. So there's a lot of misleading and incorrect information. But let's say if any of the politicians listening to this wants to find out information regarding strategic Bitcoin reserve, you can go to the White House website. And there are 2 people I would recommend to connect to. One is Bo Hines, who I believe is the Bitcoin advisor and crypto advisor for President Donald Trump, and Scott Bessent. Because right now there's a lot of misleading information regarding tariffs as well. I think he's the person to go regarding tariffs, and looks like tariffs is doing great things as well, but that is a completely different topic altogether, isn't it?
And on that point, George, so we don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
So there was an executive order that was signed, but that is not law. The next president come and just change that.
Yeah.
So I always caution to have a realistic, pragmatic approach. And we've all experienced this. Nothing at the government level moves as fast as you think it should. It takes time. You need tons of approvals. You need to sign the bills. You need to make it into law.
Yeah.
And right now, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is still, I think, in the early stages before we see an actual trigger being pulled and having purchases come in. Or they mentioned a budget neutral way. So they want to avoid using taxpayer money to fund any Bitcoin purchases.
Yeah.
And since that comment, we really haven't seen a solution, a practical solution come out that will allow them to do that. Because, yes, the majority voted for Trump, but you can't alienate the voters that are still not with the idea of purchasing Bitcoin because they might not understand it yet. So it's a very fine line that needs to be walked. So it's good to stay in a realistic mindset and keep watching the developments. But overall, we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and one of the conversation in one of the interviews, I mean, this is not official news. During the general conversation, I think Elon Musk also said, because he was handling Doge, that is Doge.gov, and they're finding a lot of wasteful spendings. One of the ideas he had put forward is, let's say if they're able to save $1 trillion, a part of it will be used to go out and buy Bitcoin. Now that, according to me, makes a lot of sense, because then President Donald Trump can go out and buy it. But let's say just by executive orders, I don't think so he'll be able to buy a lot of, because Congress will have to go out and approve it. But in case of the savings from Doge fundings, they might be in a better position to go out and buy directly Bitcoin. And earlier on, we were talking about President Donald Trump's organization. They are planning to buy Bitcoin, which is something completely different, isn't it? So it's going to be really interesting to see.
That would be more of a corporate adoption.
Yeah.
And again, that came out just a few hours ago. I'm not even sure if that's
legitimate news or not.
Yeah, because when you follow this, it's so easy to just be swamped with distractions and noise. It's really hard to, especially for someone new in the space and someone that's just there because they see numbers go up and they're like, oh, I need to get some Bitcoin. I would definitely caution against that and try to be as independent as possible. And, yourself, Bitcoin DXB, our firm, Onramp MENA, we're here to help guide you in those conversations. So please feel free to reach out. And again, I always take a cautious approach. When someone tells me, should I buy Bitcoin? My answer is yes. And then the follow-up question is like, how much should I buy? Which is always the hardest question to answer because, I think there's a direct correlation between how much time you spend studying Bitcoin and understanding it with how much you buy. So what you and I might view as a conservative allocation might be a extremely risky allocation for someone who doesn't understand it. So I always say, the goal is to get off zero.
Yeah, that's a beautiful and sound advice.
Yeah, and, I'm sure when you dipped your feet into Bitcoin, like most people, when they invest in something or have skin in the game in something, it kind of forces them to be curious and to read about it and to learn about it. And then as they start understanding, they can better benchmark whether their allocation is suitable for their risk profile.
Yeah. And just one thing which I wanted to touch base, and this is slightly to do with politics. I mean, recently on the 22nd, in fact, of this month, the One Beautiful Bill was passed. Now, there are many things involved in that. And one thing which I think indirectly impacts Bitcoin and even cryptocurrencies or shitcoins in a positive way is that they've introduced something called as 5% additional tax for remittances, which used to not be there before. So let's say if an American wants to go and send money abroad, apart from the normal fees, now they have to pay another 5%. I'm not sure if there are any amendments to it, but let's say if news suggests that, which has been passed, that is positive for the price of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, isn't it? Because they're anticipating that people will start using cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin for remittances.
Yeah, I mean, when certain punitive policies come into play, the first knee-jerk reflex of an individual is to find ways around it.
Yeah.
I don't want to pay 5%. It's like you go to a store and they tell you, yeah, we're going to charge you an extra premium. You're like, no, thank you. I'm going to go look for another store where this service fee doesn't exist. So I think, I don't know if that's going to go through. It seems kind of crazy, but, if it does, in a way, yes, it will be positive. I think people will look for other ways to move money. Now, I don't know if they'll use Bitcoin. The trend for the majority of remittances is, yes, exactly. And I understand that. I mean, in Lebanon and Argentina, they use Bitcoin as kind of their savings, but they use the USDT stablecoin or USDC as their day-to-day because, dollar is still king and we're far from just letting go of the dollar. It's almost impossible. And I think the closest thing is, these stable coins. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I think in some areas it's good. I just have a problem with what they're backed by.
True.
Which is treasuries.
Treasuries, yeah. Particularly USDT. And regarding stable coins, there is a bill that is very high chance to get passed that is called as Genius Act. Now, I have apprehensions regarding that particular bill because it does allow for a lot of stablecoin innovations, but they're not allowing room for algorithmically backed stablecoin. And according to me, Raf, when you talk about stablecoin issuers, they are literally replacing the role of a bank. And yesterday I talked about JP Morgan Chase Bank. They are planning to launch their own stablecoin, and they're planning to have a consortium as well. So let's see, with the Genius Act being passed, I do feel that the banks will be the ones who will be issuing stable coins. So it's going to be really interesting to see, where the USDT stands in this. And just one final point I wanted to touch base, and this is regarding President Donald Trump, because right now he's doing a lot of executive actions. Now all this thing is possible because of the Speaker of the House, but there's a very high possibility just in maybe less than 2 years, January 2027, the Speaker of the House would change and it'll be a Democrat. And looking at what is going on, they completely reject each and everything what Trump is doing. So I'm not sure if they're going to be pulling back on any of these allocations regarding Bitcoin. Only time will tell, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, I don't think there's a straight, clear-cut path. I think it's going to take a bit of time because the youth, for example, Republican or Democrat, are struggling with affordability.
Yeah.
And one thing that's universal and factual is if you look at the price of the median household in the US or anywhere in the world, as a matter of fact, and you price it in Bitcoin, you'll quickly realize that it's a downward slope. And houses, used to cost 50 Bitcoin. Now they cost 5 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, and the youth is natively digital. They're on their phones all the time. Everything, they hate cash, for one. Like, you won't see 21-year-old pull out cash out of their pocket. That just doesn't work. And so I think, politically, it'll be a bipartisan thing where people, as they get older, they're born into Bitcoin, they're born into digital assets. And I think it will take some time until we have things into law. I mean, listen, if it does happen faster, I'll be more than happy, but I always try to be pragmatic. But we're heading in the right direction for sure. And Trump has been a major marketer for Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
And we have to get that. Even if they revoke the executive orders, I mean, the messaging and the marketing that he's done, similar to Larry Fink from BlackRock. I mean, we're not huge fans of BlackRock, but at the end of the day, they did Bitcoin a service with the ETFs. They made it mainstream. And so did Trump. So as a Bitcoiner, you have to appreciate that.
Yeah. And Marcos, he has put out a really interesting comment, which I kind of agreed with as well. He said that, we need more countries to sell their Bitcoin, and he would want more individuals to go out and buy Bitcoin. I think he's referring to corporates not having access to Bitcoin. That does make a lot of sense as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's talk about individual sovereignty and freedom kind of a thing.
Yeah, of course. So because Bitcoin started at the individual, right?
Yeah.
It's a grassroots project. And we're going to touch on this, but with the financialization of Bitcoin, a lot of individuals will typically go to what is easier and more operationally efficient for them. So some people are like, I just want price exposure, so I'll buy the ETF. It's just much easier than buying it from an exchange. And then they tell you, you need to self-custody that. And even self-custody, doesn't matter how sophisticated you are, you can still make a mistake.
And the mistake is extremely costly.
There's no support number to call, like, oops, I sent it to the wrong address, it's gone. So I think self-custody is great, and I'm a huge fan of self-custody. This is what got me into Bitcoin. I found it fascinating that I can hold my wealth, without anyone knowing about it and safely. But I spent thousands of hours studying Bitcoin, and we cannot expect people to do the same. So our generation might be closer to the end of those who will spend time learning about it. It's like the internet. The first wave of adopters, most of them understand way more about the internet than I will ever, because I was born, the internet was there, and I grew into it. The next generation will grow into Bitcoin.
Exactly.
They're not going to ask about the difficulty adjustment. So I think we're going to see better solutions for custody, and there are a lot that are coming, which find a good balance between not having to take full responsibility yourself and not having to fully trust a single entity to hold that. because that's a problem with custody right now.
And
But yeah,
this goes back to the whole notion, don't trust, verify, isn't it? You have to go out and verify each and every information. I mean, rather than just blindly trusting anyone or even influencers for that matter. And
yeah,
regarding US, I just wanted to touch base on, the Republican versus Democrat states, and we won't get too much into politics, but I think right now there are 3 bills that are on the verge of approval. I think New Hampshire has already been approved, and it is the first state in US to go ahead and pass the bill. Along with that, Arizona and Texas. Texas, I believe they just passed it on the 21st of May, and it has now to be signed by Governor Greg Abbott, who I believe is a massive advocate of Bitcoin. So there is a very high chance that that turns out and becomes a law as well. But New Hampshire is the first state to go ahead and make it into a law. But what I'd really recommend our listeners to do is, in the show notes below, I've gone ahead and put the actual bill. And you'll be surprised. Some of them, they have really interesting information. Like one of the bill, I'm trying to recollect what it is. They've intentionally put that, the state can go ahead and put the funds as long as the market cap is about $750 million. So I think they want Bitcoin to have it as a reserve, isn't it?
Well, it's an indirect way of saying it's a Bitcoin strategic reserve because, even the crypto space, there's a lot of politics and a lot of lobbying similar to, the food lobby, the pharmaceutical lobby. So there's the crypto lobby as well. And the problem is you have to look at incentives.
Yeah.
And these lobbyists, I'll say it like Ripple, for example. I might get hated on by the Ripple army. But I mean, Ripple at the end of the day is pre-mined. It's controlled by founder, and it's not a commodity.
It's a software as well, isn't it?
It's a tech stack.
Yeah.
It's like the Google tech stack,
True.
the Apple tech stack. And so it doesn't make sense that a government or a state would buy shares of a public company. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. And so that's why they're trying to lean on this definition of Bitcoin in the US, at least, being a commodity asset, like oil.
Yeah.
It's decentralized, not controlled by really anyone, right? So that's the general idea. But yeah, there's plenty that are on the horizon. Some are further ahead than other. And yes, Texas would be a great fit to be the number 1 Bitcoin state, just because they have a decentralized grid. It's not your typical energy grid. And Bitcoin mining is so prevalent there, it's becoming part of their culture. So it just would make sense.
And last weekend, Eric Adams, who was a Democrat, was the mayor of New York. Now he's an independent. He has started a council, and this was, I believe, just last Thursday. So, someone from New York wants to be part of, what are the things that they're doing. You can directly get in touch with Eric Adams. I'm connected to him via LinkedIn as well. And he does often respond to, a lot of questions that we tend to have. Now, what about businesses? I mean, this is a hot topic area right now, and it is only because of MicroStrategy, isn't it? But right now, Ralph, I'm seeing this narrative about Bitcoin treasury companies. And they essentially have 5 steps. They raise fiat debt, buy Bitcoin, the price pumps up, they go and raise more debt. Again, the same cycle is repeated once again. What is your thoughts regarding Bitcoin treasury firms, good, bad, and the ugly side?
So I'll say it depends. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at it from a advisory consultancy point of view. And this is what I'll say. Not every company is suitable to have a Bitcoin strategic balance sheet holding. And the reason why is because, one, small to medium-sized businesses, they don't have access to capital markets like big players like MicroStrategy. They don't. They're not going to get favorable terms, and they're going to be on the hook to pay back. And they can get margin called, which means it would wipe them. They'll get liquidated, and they'll be wiped overnight.
Yep.
You can't forget that Bitcoin still is a nascent asset. Even though, yes, adoption is up, but no one can say as a fact that we're not going to see 50% drawdowns or 60% drawdowns. And that's more than enough to get you a margin call and wipe you. So that's what I'll say, one. Second, if you don't have a good business model and free cash flow, then buying Bitcoin, raising debt and buying Bitcoin is not going to change that.
Yeah.
So yes, the price can go up, but what's basically happening you're a zombie company that's gambling and speculating that Bitcoin will allow you to sustain yourself. And so the problem is the business, not your treasury. So if you don't have a solid business model, Bitcoin is not going to save you.
Yeah.
So that's two. And finally, there are companies that are just becoming Bitcoin holding companies where they create derivatives on top of derivative, leverage on top of leverage. This reminds me to, the 2000 bubble where every company in the world, whether they were a good company or a bad company, they just changed their name to internet company or .com, and they had nothing to do with the internet or .com, and they ended up blowing up.
Yeah.
And then second of all, the blockchain craze, every company became a blockchain company. Everyone used the buzzword.
Yeah.
Those blew up as well. And I just worry that, this whole trend of if you're not doing well as a business, just go buy Bitcoin, get more in debt and buy Bitcoin. I don't think that's a cautious or pragmatic approach to this. It's great if you have free cash flow.
Yeah.
You don't want your cash holdings to lose purchasing power. You put an allocation to Bitcoin, but like MicroStrategy had a first mover advantage. They have amazing terms. It's a mature company. Like they can afford to do that.
Yeah.
And their CEO is like a tech guy, knee deep into Bitcoin. But that's a unicorn, if you ask me.
Now it has become a massive unicorn, isn't it? It's an absolute giant here.
And I mean, you tell me what you think, but overall, I think it's extremely practical and extremely a solid strategy, but you need to do it in a very programmatic approach. Basically, if you want to do it, you allocate 1%, 2%,
Exactly.
5%, depending on your business, right? But it can't become the essence of your business, especially if your business is not doing well.
Yeah. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and that's exactly what my advice would be also. Allocate, let's say, 1%, 2%. Don't go full in on Bitcoin, because what you talked about, margin call, I think that'll be absolutely devastating for the company. And one trend which I've observed, and this might be the first time ever since the Bitcoin halving kicked in, whatever happened, whenever there's Bitcoin mining halving kicks in, is the miners who tend to suffer the most, isn't it? Because they have to meet a certain amount of threshold. But this time, I've noticed a lot of Bitcoin mining companies, they're also buying their own Bitcoin, and they're buying it from other people, and they're putting it as a reserve. And again, they have a lot of funds to back up that idea as well. So it does make a lot of sense for them to go and do it, as you rightly mentioned. So yeah.
And these guys, they breathe Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's all they do. And it's kind of like a cyclical business, right? So they are equipped. They know that there are halving cycles. They know that there are bear cycles, and they adjust accordingly. But a clothing business that can barely create free cash flow, putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet is not going to solve their problem, is what I'm saying. It might help extend the runway, but it needs to be, at least 5 to 10 years. If they need the cash now, they're better off taking that fiat, restructuring the business, fixing the business, start generating cash flow, and then the excess cash flow that they are not going to use, park it in Bitcoin. Take a staggered approach.
And am I right in saying, Ralph, right now, at least with the narrative and the hype going on, does it make a lot of sense to focus more on the announcement? Because I remember there's a company in India, I think it is called as JetKings Infotrain. They made an announcement that they're going all in on Bitcoin, and they ended up purchasing 12 Bitcoin, which for that company isn't a lot because it is a very high-tech company. And there is a guy called Kuram Shroff who was an advisor for them, who's one of the OGs of Bitcoin mining. He used to mine Bitcoin when it was less than $1. So do you think it's ideal for companies to even focus on the announcement part of it? So let's say even if you buy, let's say, half a Bitcoin, but you go out and publish it in Khaleej Times or Gulf News that you're fully getting into Bitcoin, is that narrative working, do you think?
Yeah, so first of all, JetKing is a publicly listed company in India. So they would get good terms, right? And they have a solid business as well. So it would make sense that they would allocate to Bitcoin 100%. So that's one of those, and they have the first mover advantage in India.
Yeah.
They're the first to do that, right? Similar to how MicroStrategy was the first to do it in the United States. And yes, similar to the internet .com rally, the blockchain rally, the marketing on its own will pump up your price, but that is not, sustainable over the long term, because at the end of the day, yes, after the hype fades, then financials start to kick in and people start analyzing and critiquing your business. It doesn't matter, and they'll critique it even more if you have 50% of your treasury in Bitcoin and Bitcoin is down 60%. Like, what do you do then? Like, oops.
That's unnecessary drama on the space, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just something to be mindful of, because a lot of people have an incentive to prop up these, securities or equity trades, because a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's returning more than Bitcoin." Well, of course it is, because it's leverage.
Yeah,
like people forget that you're not just buying a piece of equity; it's a leveraged piece of equity, and you could go leverage your Bitcoin and do the same. You could take a loan and go buy Bitcoin with it yourself, but you hold actual Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Here, there's multiple layers of counterparty risk. There's the equity security that you're buying. Then they're not holding the Bitcoin. They're trusting a custodian to hold that Bitcoin. So that's an extra layer as well. You don't know if that Bitcoin is being rehypothecated or, it's not opaque. Like, I think today they asked Michael Saylor a question about proof of reserves to share the public addresses of the Bitcoin holding.
Yeah.
And he shut that down, if I understood correctly. Mm-hmm. And it got a lot of people upset. In a way, it makes sense because it's an entity. Also, sharing your information about a corporate entity isn't, from a security point of view, ideal. But, the ethos is, Bitcoin's on-chain, you can verify the holdings.
Yeah.
The problem with a lot of these, custodians are few. So they will, most of, like the ETFs, let's take that for an example. The ETFs, 80 to 90% of all the Bitcoin ETFs are held by one custodian, Coinbase Prime.
Yeah.
So, and if you look at the ETF disclosures in the filing, basically you as an ETF investor become an unsecured creditor in the event the custodian fails. Meaning they might take the money you've invested, which is supposedly in Bitcoin, as their own to deal with bankruptcy proceedings. Meaning you might end up with nothing. You might not end up getting paid. So that's a risk that a lot of people don't factor in. And I think the problem is they're viewing it as exposure to Bitcoin, but not a generational savings vehicle. They're viewing it as, okay, I just want exposure to this thing. I don't understand it. But that's a fair argument if that's what you want. But over time, people will start to realize that the risk is not as straightforward as it seems. It's much higher, actually.
Especially when you talk about ETFs. And I think last Thursday, I think BlackRock had the highest inflows ever in Bitcoin ETF, and that was before Trump announced the 50% tariff on European unions. Now, what about international development, Ralph? And this is something connected to Onramp MENA in Bahrain as well, because I think there's a company called as Albright, and they've added Bitcoin as a reserve, which I believe is the first in the history. It's a restaurant chain, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it?
Yes, Albaraj Restaurant Group. So it's the first publicly listed GCC company, which is listed on the Bahrain Stock Exchange, which is, Bahrain is a small country. It's a small market, but they like to be innovative and very forward-thinking. So they were similar to the UAE, some of the first globally to create a regulatory framework for digital assets. So I believe this company has a small market cap. It's like 25 million because Bahrain is small. And they allocated, I think, 5 to 7 BTC on their balance sheet. So we're seeing a trend because people here look to the West. People to the West look to here.
Yeah.
So the world, people like to copy each other. If it's a good idea, everyone wants to get on board the good idea. If it's a bad idea, no one wants to do it. Yeah. Before, people used to think Bitcoin was a bad idea. Now, it seems that the narrative is shifting. People are saying that maybe it is a good idea, and I can't afford to not be a part of this. It would destroy my reputation. So the reputational risk has flipped. Not talking about Bitcoin is the risk, or not investigating. And I think the GCC is primed for some of the best adoption. Some of them might be accumulating, but they might be taking on a similar approach to Bhutan.
Yeah.
Which is, we're not
Even
going to pay
better.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we want to keep accumulating as much as we can. And when a bigger country announces, then we can come out and say, yes, we already have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that would happen, especially in the UAE or Bahrain, for example.
You talked about, the perception about people changing their idea regarding Bitcoin in 2016, and this was before the second halving or third halving. I was at the JW Maris Health Club, and there was a CID officer who was a gym pal, by the way. His friend was looking at the prices of gold, and I was talking to him about Bitcoin. Do you know what Bitcoin is? After the gym, that CID officer, he's a very nice guy. He came up to me and said, "Brother, if you have any problem, call me, I will save you." And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm just talking about, he intentionally thought that, I'm dealing with something illegal and something notorious or something of that sort. But now I'm in touch with him, and now he truly understands what Bitcoin is. So yeah, the narrative regarding Bitcoin is definitely changed, and it has a completely different perspective now. What about, UAE? Do you think any idea on what is going on, particularly in the United Arab Emirates, regarding strategic Bitcoin reserve or Bitcoin reserve, even by the governments or private entity firms? Or do you anticipate some news coming up in the next few months, years, maybe?
I mean, it's all speculation, right? No one knows. But there are a lot of signs. I mean, some of the big miners have a presence here, working with the government. And so where's that Bitcoin going? The government has invested heavily in building a regulatory framework, and one of the sovereign wealth funds holds one of the Bitcoin ETFs, quite a big chunk, like $500 million. So you start to question, you put the numbers 1 and 2 together, and you're like, I mean, they must hold something outside of these numbers, especially that they've been in this industry the longest from a regulatory point of view, because they're way ahead. Like in the United States now, they're talking about, crypto regulation, regulatory framework. Here, there's really nothing to talk about except how do we improve it? How do we, it's already there. Bahrain, UAE, they have full frameworks, categories for different types of services. There's no question mark. You go, you talk to the regulator. This is what I want to do. They're like, okay, you fit under this rule book. Here are the requirements. If you have them, apply. So it's very different.
Yep. And I'm not sure, Ralph, if you know that when you talk about UAE being at the forefront, the first cryptocurrency exchange in the world was actually in Dubai. It was an exchange called a Scotia Exchange, and they got the license 2 weeks before Kraken in US. Hopefully we'll try to get him on the episode one day as well. I mean, and he had a really small office called a Scotia Exchange. Now, regarding advice, to have strategic reserve, I did interview, the head of research for CoinShares, and this was before the approval of Bitcoin halving, because we discussed that the Bitcoin halving most likely will not happen. The Bitcoin ETF will not get approved under the Biden administration, but it did. And he wrote an article called as, a little bit of Bitcoin goes a long way. I'd urge our listeners to go ahead and read it. But I asked him, what advice would he like to give for high net worthy individuals to go ahead and put Bitcoin onto the balance sheet? And he said somewhere around 4%. But, he's got an article where he's talking about somewhere between 1 to 5%. So I think, it's a great article worth reading into the scholars. A little Bitcoin goes a long way. Now, his advice was before the Bitcoin ETF approval. And he was saying there is no chance for it to be approved because of the Democrats not being a fan of Bitcoin and ETF. But now things have completely changed and taken a U-turn, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it feels like, so much has happened within the last year and a half. Yeah. It's kind of crazy. Usually it's gradually, then suddenly, and all of a sudden it's suddenly. Things are just popping off everywhere. And, we haven't even gotten a sovereign state country to buy Bitcoin, and you have a wave of corporate adoption happening in the United. Every week there's some announcement of a company putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Even at a global stage, Japan, there's examples everywhere. I think, if I were to give a family office or high net worth individual advice or institution, they don't have to go about it alone. It's extremely, difficult to just dive in. You already have a job. you already have responsibilities, and diving into Bitcoin can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
I would say, take on a practical approach. So get the advice you need to help you, one, integrate it into your entity, into your family, because sometimes, we think companies or family offices are run just by one person. At the end of the day, they have a responsibility towards, the office itself or the shareholders, stakeholders. So there's a process. You have to first understand it, and then from the top to the bottom, you have to educate and communicate why you're doing this. And if you have no expertise in Bitcoin, it's extremely difficult to do.
Yeah.
So you typically seek help, and then based on your financial situation, on your needs, someone has to do a risk assessment to understand, one, your business or your portfolio as a whole, to understand where Bitcoin would fit in. Once you understand where it fit in, you get a better idea on how much to allocate.
Yeah.
And it depends on your risk appetite and also your time horizon. So you don't have to go knee deep into Bitcoin. You can start off, like you said, extremely low at 0.5% to 1% and keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
And over time, you can start accumulating and averaging out your position. Or some other entities would prefer to set a target allocation. For example, let's say 3%. And if Bitcoin grows above 3%, what they do, they harvest that volatility and bring it back to 3%. If it goes down, they add more to bring it back to 3%. So there's a variety of strategies that would fit your institutions, your family office, or yourself as an individual that you could look at. But I think it's important to understand the goals, why you're doing this, because that affects your time horizon, and how to do it. Because you can get all of this right, and then you get to the part, okay, so where do I hold it? Or how do I hold it?
Yeah.
You still need help with that, because there's so many options out there, and there's a lot of charlatans that will tell you, oh, we have the best custody, or we have the best setup. And trusting them is the first mistake. You need to understand the model so that you can make a good decision on what's suitable for you. So that's my advice, is take a educational approach, and you're doing a great job, George, on providing that to your audience. Onramp MENA, we do the same. So we take a very consultancy approach to things, where we sit down with anyone and we understand their needs, and based on that, we figure out what the best framework is for them.
That is definitely solid advice. And Ralph, you also touched base on, keeping a point on a couple of things. What I tell a lot of clients, let's say, who are not in the Bitcoin cryptocurrency space, who are, let's say, fitness experts, some of them are teachers, and they want to go out and buy Bitcoin, I tell them, just keep a track on three things. One is the inflation data, as you mentioned earlier on as well. The moment CPI numbers are out, the entire world starts dancing around it. And so what I tend to do is, I give them a list, and there's just three websites. One is Bureau of Labor Statistics website. I've even told them that you don't need to look at this information. Ask your kid or your son or daughter to use ChatGPT and summarize it for you, because that's the right way of doing it. It's great education for your kids as well. So inflation is one, and I tell them the FOMC meeting, this is where Federal Chair Jerome Powell announces the interest rate. And I notice, he usually announces it at 10 p.m. Gulf Standard Time, and in literally an hour's time at 11 p.m., the Central Bank of UAE, they literally copy-paste the same thing, and they say, okay, we are going to increase it by so-and-so percentage. And the third one now is about tariffs, because, tariffs is definitely making a massive impact so far as not only the impact, even the usage of cryptocurrency is a concern. And it's pretty simple, you look at information from the first source. Scott Bessent is the best person, and even the White House. And people were saying that tariffs will be increasing the inflation, but for the first time, the inflation has actually gone down in 4 years, and you can make an argument it is gone because of tariffs, isn't it? That is essentially what I say. But what about geopolitical chaos? Do you think that could have an impact? I'm hoping there should not be any geopolitical chaos, but regarding Bitcoin as a reserve, that could also add a bit of drama, isn't it?
Yeah, so, anything geopolitical or macro has a tendency to affect Bitcoin. In the past, Bitcoin was extremely correlated to technology stocks, but we're starting to see decoupling. What it's now more correlated to is the money supply. So a lot of people, when they talk about tariffs, they're thinking, okay, this is going to, cause inflation issues, right? And then people are like, oh, they might increase interest rates. But we're in this weird situation where the president of the United States is forcing or trying to force the hand of the governor of the central bank to lower interest rates.
Yeah.
Lowering interest rates with higher inflation usually is a recipe for disaster because you fight the inflation with higher interest rate. So there's so much chaos that people kind of starting to wake up and like, I want to kind of sit this one out.
Makes sense,
and the only way to get it out is to hold an asset that's not connected to the system, and that's Bitcoin.
True. That makes brilliant sense, doesn't it? Just to be completely disconnected with all of those things. So what you're saying is absolutely spot on. And what about, I've noticed that, lately, this year, there's going to be a couple of elections coming up. Now, we briefly touched base upon Nigel Farage, who I think, is a king of politics, and there is a very high chance he could become the next Prime Minister of England. He's a massive advocate of Bitcoin. He does not, for our listeners, if you look at his Instagram, he says no to digital assets. He's referring to central bank digital currencies. He's an absolutely massive no for CBDCs, but he's definitely a huge fan of Bitcoin. And Conor McGregor, the notorious Conor McGregor, he wants to have Bitcoin as a reserve as well, isn't it? So right now, a lot of politicians are getting into the Bitcoin game as well.
Yeah, but you know why? Well, Farage experienced financial censorship.
Yes.
His bank accounts were all frozen.
Yeah.
And he's thinking a CBDC will only amplify that.
Yeah.
And look at the countries, McGregor, Farage, the UK, Ireland, these countries, have been struggling a lot politically and especially economically. Like the cost of living there is becoming extremely difficult, and there's just too much socialism, which is at the root of these problems, because socialism is based on payouts and handouts and which equals higher taxes.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. In Canada is the same issue. We have Mark Carney now that came into power, and he's a heavy socialist. So versus Trump, which is more of a capitalist. I mean, he can't go the full extreme libertarian type of thing like Milei did, but it's more of a capitalist. Let's bring everything here. Let's build it ourselves, and let's not rely on the rest of the world. So it seems globalization is starting to take a hit. And the same way in the U.S., people wanted more nationalism, taking care of their own selves because they need the help. Why are we helping other countries while we are? So I think Farage and McGregor are kind of jumping on that bandwagon, which is especially the youth. That's their target.
Yep.
I mean, the baby boomers are happy. They made a fortune. They're in a comfortable situation, but the youth, especially Generation Z, can barely afford anything nowadays. I mean, the American dream is so far in the horizon, they can't even see it anymore. It's just difficult.
Right now, it is the Dubai dream, and hopefully, maybe Saudi Arabian dream as well. That's what at least I envision. But let's see how things turn out to be.
Dubai has been at the forefront. You see a huge inflow of people leaving socialist countries to come to live in Dubai for security reasons, no taxes. Yes, I mean, you have to pay for stuff, but for a lot of people, it just makes more sense to decide what to pay on versus being told this is what you get. And innovation and forward thinking is a big theme. And we see Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest market in the region, to be in competition with the UAE. So it's a healthy competition. They don't want to be left behind. Sure. And we've seen with their leader, MBS, he's really pushing hard. And with the deals with the United States between the UAE and potentially Saudi Arabia, it's just crazy. There's a shift in the geopolitical macro landscape, and I think the GCC overall will be in a much different position in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yep. And regarding, strategic Bitcoin reserve, I think in Czech, the National Bank's governor, He is also allocating 5% of the bank's money, which is, I believe, 140 billion euros, which might be approximately $7.3 billion. I'm not sure what the update to that is. But I think later this year, there's elections taking place in Poland. And one of the candidates has pledged that, he's going to be establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And if I'm not mistaken, they did have an election on the 18th of this month, but there was no winners. So hopefully on the 1st of June or 2nd of June, we're going to be finding out who the next president of Poland is. And let's say it is a pro-Bitcoin guy, then it'd be great. Most likely they will have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And along with that, I did interview the press person from Relay, and he was talking about Swiss National Bank. And they have, I think they need to get 100,000 signatures, and if that thing gets approved, then the government or the central bank of Switzerland, they will be forced to go ahead and put Bitcoin onto the balance sheet. So you'll have to wait and see what the ability to that is as well.
It's going to be an interesting year, that's for sure.
Yep. What advice, Ralph, you would have, let's say, for governments in terms of, I hate to say this, is it Bitcoin versus, do we go ahead and put cryptocurrencies as a reserve as well? Because President Trump, he has put a Bitcoin strategic reserve, and then there is another reserve called as crypto digital asset stockpile. So does it make sense to have cryptocurrencies as well, let's say like Cardano, Solana, or stable coins as well?
I mean, personally, I don't think it makes sense because why don't you just go and build a reserve and buy up your stock exchange?
Yeah.
You'd be doing more people a favor.
Better, right? Yeah. I think that's a brilliant, short and sweet answer, yeah.
It would make more sense because it's the same thing, but you're buying U.S. Technology companies, basically. Just go buy your own stock market. And even that will create a misalignment when it comes to capital allocation because you're going to distort the market signal and you will no longer know which companies are actually the ones adding value to society. So I think it's too much government reach at that point to interfere in the capital markets that way. And to me, a strategic reserve is an asset that no one controls, that's decentralized, and that in some form of way cannot be impacted by any entity, whether a government, corporation, institution, or individual. And that's the only asset that should be in a reserve.
Yeah, and what you said is an absolutely brilliant point. And one of the politicians in India, I'm not sure if he's an advocate, if he knows about Bitcoin or not, but he's playing with the words and he's advocating for central bank digital currencies. But, he's using words like, financial freedom. He's talking about, ease of payments. And I think he's trying to trick people into saying that CBDCs are much better than what Bitcoin is. So at the geopolitical level or at the governmental level, it's so important to make them understand the difference between central bank digital currencies and Bitcoin. And what I'm planning to do is, I'm planning to have an event on central bank digital currencies as well. Explain what are the different types of CBDCs, because you have retail, wholesale, multiple CBDC. UE already is a part of it. Can that be replaced by, let's say, Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin, you have Lightning Network, Liquid Network, and Ralph, we also talked about right now the narrative is about tokenization, isn't it? Everyone has become experts on tokenization. So
yeah, and it's a fascinating trend, right? Yeah. I mean, we went from ICO, DeFi, NFT, decentralized organization, metaverse, and now we're at RWA. Yeah. I mean, RWA is not a concept that I've dug too deep into, and there are some things that right off the bat would concern me, but it might facilitate certain things. Let's say, for example, having the stock exchange trade 24/7 using tokens rather than the actual certificates. But my problem with I think stable coins will find their way to Bitcoin, especially with the development of taproot assets. Yeah. There's a guy that's fascinating, Segun Gard. He's really knee-deep into this. He's one of the OGs in the Bitcoin space, and he talks about how taproot assets on top of Bitcoin, so it's like a third layer, similar to how Lightning, which is for payments, is a second layer. Third layer would allow the issuance of stable coins on top of Bitcoin. So basically, you anchor the stable coin to Bitcoin. And the way he positioned it was that everything that's happening on other chains is a prototype. And now with Taproot assets, we can anchor all of that to the most secure layer 1 and most decentralized layer 1 protocol, which is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We just need to build on top of it. I mean, the internet was not built in one go. We have TCP IP, then we have email, then we have all that kind of stuff. No one decided, oh, I'm going to stop TCP IP. I'm going to go and build one new layer of the internet that solves all the problems of the world. That's not how software architecture usually works. You build it layer by layer. And typically the fundamental layer is the one that focuses on security and robustness. So I think we'll see more and more things get built on top of Bitcoin. I don't know if those things will be good things, but, stable coins I think the only successful application of tokenization, in my opinion, is stable coins, because what they are really is the tokenization of fiat currency.
And go on.
No, go ahead. No,
I was just saying that right now there's this narrative building up, and this is something which I've only noticed in Dubai. They're talking about BTC-Fi or Bitcoin Finance, where something similar to what Celsius used to do or BlockFi used to do. That is a narrative which is building up, which me personally, I'm not liking it. But let's see how that narrative develops as well.
I think the problem is these BTC, DeFi stuff, I don't even think they're on the core chain.
Yeah,
I think you have to bridge them to a different blockchain, and then it's wrapped, and it's an ERC20 token. That's not really Bitcoin, in my opinion. And bridges, every time you move from one chain to another, it's a problem because that's a single point of failure. And those are software, and those are run by people. I mean, the bridges, they're a solution to try to solve the problem. And most of the time, that solution at some point breaks. Most of the hacks that we've seen in the crypto asset space is from moving from one chain to another.
And in that bridge, Ralph, I do remember one story, an actual case that did happen, I believe in 2018 or 19, where this whole notion about not your keys, not your coin was completely thrown out, because in that bridge, you could literally replace the private key of another person, and that was the person who did that literally did it on a Word document. The person who did the hack, he literally did it on a Word document. He replaced the private keys with his own, and those coins turned out to be. So there are a lot of dangers, particularly with bridge. But that area has definitely been tackled. But yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything, isn't it? I think the only thing is regarding volatility. I think we need to be aware of, because look, as much as I like President Donald Trump, but let's say if there is any negative thing that does actually come up. Let's say even Michael Saylor. I mean, there is extreme volatility that gets involved, whether we like it or not, isn't it? So just people to be aware about that thing. But yeah, I think we've covered pretty much everything, Ralph, isn't it?
Yeah, we've covered quite a bit. Really enjoyed this conversation. For parting words, I'd say, look into Bitcoin. Everyone should at least be curious to look into it. And there are a variety of people or companies there to help you do it the right way. And yeah, of course, you want to do your own research and always take a risk-centered framework is how I would put it. I mean, you need to understand your appetite for risk, and you need to understand how much you're willing to put in. And, doesn't have to be crazy amounts. It could be just baby steps, right? Just to get a little bit of a taste of what it is, learn about the asset, and then you can make a informed decision. The idea is to make an informed decision. Whether you decide to look at it or not, make that decision after you've made an informed decision. Because the way the world is headed, it seems we're heading into more and more Bitcoin adoption, and there's only 21 million. And there's not enough for every millionaire to buy.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for doing this. Really, really appreciate it. And what I'll do is, in the show notes, I'll go ahead and mention all of your contact details. And if people want to go and listen to the audio version, it will be there on the Blockchain DXB website, and I'll send Ralph the audio file of this as well. So thanks so much, Ralph, for doing this.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
Hey, it was a pleasure, George. Looking forward for the next one.
Thank you very much.